well, clearly we need to.
That's a trick
Is it? Well,
question.
I don't. The thing is, it's like, what does Christian behavior even mean? And so I've been reading. Okay, it's this very interesting book on the British Jesus. I'll show the book. 1850 to 1970 by Meredith Feldman. I highly recommend this if you want to know why we have the images of Jesus that we do. And the thing that she talks about, she's not talking about manners or behaving like a Christian. This is just like how Jesus was represented in Victorian England and into Edwardian England, and it goes through 1970. So she has a postscript where she talks about life of Brian and a bit on Zeffirelli's Jesus of Nazareth. Things that I did not appreciate. I did not appreciate how strange it was. For example, in the 40s, it's the 40s. All my dates have flown out of my head. In the 1940s, when Dorothy Sayers wrote the script for the radio play, The Man Who Would Be King, that this was the first time the BBC had tried to portray Jesus at all. Right. So it's like the radio Jesus is coming into being. And then by the 1950s, they have to, they're worried about the television Jesus. So they have to, invent him. So that I realized that the shows that I was impressed by from the 70s, like what Godspell and Jesus Christ Superstar and Jesus of Nazareth, the Zeffirelli one, and then Life of Brian soon after. Like the 1970s was this heyday of these new Jesus narratives. I guess Hollywood had been making all the sword and sandal epics in the 50s, but we're sort of suddenly in the electric Jesus with all of this imagery. And for England, it was very challenging because Jesus had not been portrayed by an actor since the 17th century.
Interesting.
Yeah, that blew my mind.
Why?
Because they thought it was Catholic.
Oh, yes.
Because yes, and so think about my nose starts dripping when I'm talking about not portraying the incarnate God on the stage. Sniff, snort, right? Yeah. Okay. So there had been a theater act that forbid the portrayal of Jesus on stage from the 17th century. So we think of English drama, the great English drama, right? Shakespeare and stuff. They're never portraying Jesus until Dorothy Sayers did this radio play script. And then in the 50s, they have a television show on the BBC with Tom Fleming. I haven't watched this one, portraying Jesus. And he's sort of it's a more standard classical actor. So he goes all King James Version on them. But because the Protestants were so anxious about not falling into Catholicism, that was one of the things. That there were complaints about Sayers' radio version of Jesus, that it's this lady novelist doing the Roman Catholic Oberammergau, the great passion play in Germany.
So they're terrified of converting by accident to Catholic behavior.
Yes. That they don't. I loved Sayers' play. I didn't realize it's like horribly Anglican, but that they worried about letters. The BBC got letters all the time. We think this dramatization of the New Testament is dreadful. This impersonation of Christ and Mary in modern voices, apart from being ridiculous, it is wrong and gives an incorrect impression and removes the awe and majesty due to Christ. They were constant. It's interesting that the more they tried to portray the incarnate Christ, the more people got upset. So that we end up on the other side with the Life of Brian is kind of like it's a straight trajectory there. And what the problem being for the English is, by the time the Pythons did Life of Brian, nobody cared. Right? It was at least according to Feldman in her account, that they tried so hard to represent a historically accurate Jesus, they ended up with no God.
So they'd stripped all the spirituality out of the gospel, trying to make it so historically accurate.
Yes and no. So sort of, right? It's like, and that's, you think, okay, it's just simple that they want to, they're worried about making him historically accurate. And we used some pictures from some of that last week with particularly Tissot's representations of the New Testament. That's going to get more complicated, but one of it's like they didn't know how to portray Jesus, and they kept wanting to make sure that he is both human, but not Roman Catholic, but awe-inspiring and majestic, but not too silly or mystical or something. So the picture I'm showing now is one of these. If you're up in the 1950s in England, you would see this kind of Jesus in your children's Bible, right? Or they all end up in the children's book. So you have Jesus. He actually, what I find funny about this one is it's considered one of the sort of more feminized representations of Jesus. So he's sort of looking gently over his shoulder and he's holding a lamb and stuff, but he's got the beard of that and the jaw of that Chad guy in the Gifts. This Chad meme guy, long-haired, bearded Jesus is also a little wispy, right, in his affect, because he's sort of gently cradling the little lamb. There was a whole series of paintings done by this Harold Copping. I think that I've got his name right. And the one showing now is Jesus with Mary and Martha, and you can see the effects of the sort of they want it all to be accurate, but they want it to be sort of awe-inspired and majestic, and they want it to be not Catholic, but it's like they're in this terrible conflict in the public conversation about what, and they're also, Feldman is very good about this. She's also talking about the way in which the Victorian New Testament scholars themselves are desperately fighting off the German Protestant liberal version of Jesus, which has a variety of registers, whether or not they think they can find Jesus in the New Testament as a historical character, or whether the New Testament is all mythology, or whether it's like nobody knows where to look. And never mind, what would Jesus do? They're like vexed with how to, and I think with our conversations, I realized some of this is all happening in the midst of the great media transformation that obviously we're also meditating on. It all begins around 1860. It plays out in these paintings, these books, these reproduce the pictures, the famous pictures, the Tissot pictures will turn into slideshows, right? They'll have lantern slides, so you can go to your Sunday school or your church and have lectures with slides like we do here. And then, the radio plays, and then the television, and there's this incredible anxiety about what do you do once you're trying to portray Jesus, not, in pictures or with an actor making, believe that he is portraying our Lord.
Well, it's interesting because all of the uses of those images, they're doing everything with them, but using them in a liturgical setting.
Yes.
Which is what the icons were used and are used as. They're liturgical media.
Yeah.
They're not illustrative in the sense that, you've just got some pictures for the slideshow, or you've got some pictures to put in the children's books, or they get this incredible anxiety about whether or not they're doing it right.
Constantly. There's several of these pictures. Veldman says that they like everybody would have known them. Everybody would have seen them. And the one that she uses on the cover of her book is the one I'm showing now. And it's Jesus with children, right? So we're moving into this problem of they're all anxious about how to educate the children in Christianity, and realizing the children don't know the stories, but then they get very anxious about scaring the children with stories like, I don't know, the crucifixion, but the scaring children with the Old Testament stories. So there's a persistent refrain of you need to make Jesus friendly so that the children want to be with him. We said he looks like a Chad. In this one, I mean, there's obviously a lot of complaint about this, because he's trying to be shown as, embracing children of the whole world. So we have children from all continents, therefore Chinese and Indian and African and I guess Pacific Ocean, and then there's a
Brad Pitt Jesus,
and then there's a little white girl on the side, and of course there's massive complaints about this because all of the children are looking at Jesus except for the little white girl who is the same color as Jesus, and now we're in that level of, if you're trying to portray him physically, historically accurately, then you have to deal with, oh gosh, race. Because this is of course the period when the British are one in control of all of these regions, sort of. I guess China's dealing with the Opium War and such, and that
Yes.
the empire is trying to represent itself as Christian. And what does that mean?
Christ-like.
Christ-like, right? Where are we going to go with Christ-like on all of this? And then they do have one very, very famous picture, which is this Jesus at the doorway, Holman Hunt's Light of the World, which is so contentious. It goes through like 3 different versions. I think this is the version in Canterbury. Anyway, and this one apparently is, if you asked Protestants by the late 19th century what Jesus looked like, it would be with this picture. Do you remember it? I showed it to you.
Yeah, I think I do.
It's Jesus knocking at a door. He's all illuminated. He's holding this lantern.
Oh, yes, that one.
He's got a kind of liturgical cope on and a halo, and it's all very allegorical. I mean, Holman Hunt was trying. I mean, what's funny is he's trying to find a Protestant Jesus, and when he first did this painting, everybody hated it because they said it was too Catholic, or they said it was too mystical, or they said it was too weird. By the end of the century, it's like talking about our. You know, if you're too far ahead of the curve, you just wait 30 years and people catch up eventually. By the end of the century, everybody had a copy of this painting. It was, you know, if you had they'd made prints of it, they'd sold, you know, copies that workers would have in their cottages and stuff. And here now is, I guess, the Jesus that we're going to try to be like, which is this kind of, well, one of the interesting responses to what happens with Holman Hunt's painting is people looked at Jesus's face in this and they said they're constantly worried about Jesus being represented as too feminine. Hunt actually did use women as some of his models for this image, right? He had it's like a composite image. It's a sort of blended face, and people were picking up on the fact that he has Rossetti as one of his models. So there's this blending of features on his face. And the other effect was that Jesus Forever After in English representations is going to be, as Feldman keeps saying, in a white nightie. Jesus in his white nightgown, right? Thanks to Holman Hunt painting him as he's trying to show him as the light, right? The light that bursts into the world, the light that comes to the door of the heart and knocks on it and wants to be let in and stuff. And, you know, weirdly enough, what you end up with is Jesus Forever After in, you know, English imagination.
I was going to say, there are not many steps before you arrive at the Mormon Jesus from that image.
I suppose, right? I'll go back to that. Yes, it's Jesus in the white nightie is the problem that, at least in the English Protestant world, we seem to be faced with. It's like, if you the only one we can see, and every single time they make a television program or a movie, even Life of Brian, I'll get to that one in a second, in the English media, and it feeds over into the American media too, it ends up with, for the Protestants, he has to have this kind of ethereal character that's also incarnate, that's also not racial, that is masculine, that is feminine.
That all sounds very, very inclusive. And very, like, inclusivity neurosis.
Yes, the inclusivity neurosis is already playing out in the English representation of Jesus over and over and over again, right? Here's Ye holding his Bible, again, squinting at it. This is becoming iconic for us, right? I like this particular shot of Ye holding the Bible, squinting at it, saying, what do we see through this, right? What do we see through this? It is the icon for English speakers of, we're constantly holding the book, saying that we should be able to look at the book and see through the book to what?
The Word.
The Word.
Everybody wants to see the Word in the Word. But the trouble is, you can't see the Word in the Word without the church.